You know, some people spend their whole lives chasing love. But for Jackson Reed, love was the one thing he avoided. Not because he didn't believe in it, but because he'd already seen what it could cost. And now, with just 7 days until his baby sister's wedding, he was cornered. The story begins on a gray Thursday afternoon in downtown Denver. Yes, did Jackson Reed. 36 sat in the corner office of his real estate development firm, a towering glass suite that overlooked the Rockies. Polished hardwood floors, sleek black furniture, 3 monitors blinking with market data. Everything screamed power control precision, except the blinking icon on his phone, Amelia calling. His fingers hovered. He sighed. "Hey, squirt," he answered with a chuckle. "Don't hey squirt me," came his sister's voice, full of laughter and fire. "Jackson Reed, if you show up to my wedding alone again, I swear I'm seating you next to Aunt Carol and all 3 of her cats." Jackson rubbed his temple. He could already picture it. Champagne fountains forced small talk, and an army of hopeful singles his mother would parade before him like he was a prize pig at the county fair. "I RSVP'd," he said. "Gifts on the way. I even wrote a speech." "That's nice, but not enough," Amelia pressed. "You're the best man. You'll be at the head table. You're going to stick out like a blinking single and miserable sign, unless you bring someone." Jackson sighed again. "Mom's involved, isn't she?" Amelia laughed softly. "She's flying in 3 women, all single, all pre-approved." "You're welcome." It was a joke, but not really. Jackson had built an empire. His company had turned abandoned city blocks into vibrant communities. But when it came to his personal life, everyone thought he was broken. Maybe he was. After a brutal breakup 2 years ago and a tabloid scandal before, that love had become a liability. After the call ended, Jackson stood at his window, the skyline glinting in the afternoon haze. He needed a plan, something temporary. He'd dated, but nothing stuck. His past relationships felt transactional, empty, or fueled by what people thought he could offer. He didn't want a blind date, and he sure as hell wasn't dragging someone new into the chaos of his family, unless she could handle it. That night the thought hit him while eating takeout Thai and scrolling through local news. Elise Carter. 2 months ago, he'd attended a charity art gala for inner-city youth programs. He barely remembered the overpriced canapes or the speeches, but he remembered her. The moment the main host lost his voice and chaos threatened to erupt, Elise, who had been working the event behind the scenes, stepped forward, mic in hand. She wasn't flashy or loud, just calm, smart, witty. She had a way of making the guests lean in and laugh, without ever sounding like she was trying. And when Jackson introduced himself, she'd been polite, but unmoved. That was rare. Now she seemed like the perfect candidate. Someone poised, sharp, detached, and definitely not interested in becoming Mrs. Reed. He Googled her. Elise Carter, 29, program director at the Copper Lane Community Arts Center. Bingo. Jackson spent the next day obsessing over how to phrase the email. Businesslike, friendly, honest, crazy. In the end, he typed, "Miss Carter, I hope this message finds you well. We met briefly at the Anderson Gala 2 months ago. I remember being impressed by how effortlessly you managed the event, and if I may be so bold, I find myself in need of your particular skill set for a highly unusual and one-time assignment. I'll explain everything over coffee, and yes, I'll pay you well for your time. Best, Jackson Reed." The next morning, he was standing in front of the Copper Lane Arts Center, a restored brick building with murals on its walls and children's drawings taped to its windows. He wore jeans and a gray Henley, hoping to look approachable. As he stepped inside, the scent of acrylic paint and dusty books hit him. A little girl darted past him carrying a canvas. Laughter rang through the halls. Then, there she was. Elise stood near the back, arranging supplies on a shelf. She turned surprised but composed. "Mr. Reed," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I promised this would be strange," Jackson said, offering a small, apologetic smile. "But I think it might be worth your time." She raised an eyebrow. "Strange how—" Jackson took a deep breath. "I want to hire you," he said, "to be my girlfriend. For one night, for my sister's wedding." Elise blinked. "That's definitely new." "I'll pay you $5,000, Jackson added quickly. "Just to pretend, be charming, Convince my mother I'm not a tragic bachelor destined for a life of solitude. Elise didn't laugh. Instead, she stared at him like a puzzle. Why me? He paused. Because you don't care who I am, and I need someone who can act without getting attached. She tapped her fingers on a paint-splattered table, considering. And then she said, let's talk details. This story begins with a lie, but ends with something far more unexpected. The next morning, Jackson Reed found himself back in his car engine, idling outside the Copper Lane Arts Center. He was questioning his sanity. Who in their right mind asked a woman to fake a relationship for a weekend, especially one he barely knew? But there was something about Elise Carter that made him believe this could work. She didn't flinch easily. She didn't gush swoon or giggle. And she didn't seem the least bit impressed by his money, which was refreshing. Inside the art center's small office, Elise waited with arms folded and eyebrows arched. She wore high-waisted jeans, a navy sweater flecked with paint, and a look that said, "Convince me." "All right, Mr. Reed," she said. "You've got 5 minutes." Jackson smiled slightly. "Fair enough." He laid it out. Everything. The family pressure, the wedding this Saturday, his mother's obsession with setting him up, the awkward head table where he'd be the only single person in a sea of couples, and the last straw being threatened with a seat next to Aunt Carol, who traveled with laminated cat photos and a rolling suitcase of snacks for them. Elise stared for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. "So, you want me to be your +1 to a wedding, smile for photos, make your mom think you're finally off the market, and pretend we're, 2 months in?" 3 months, Jackson replied. Met at the Anderson Gala. Instant connection. Took things slow. She raised a brow. "You've thought this through." "I had a lot of time last night while trying to figure out how not to look like a desperate, emotionally repressed bachelor," he admitted. Elise smirked. "And why me out of everyone you know?" "Because you're not part of my world. And because you're not going to try to turn this into anything else. I need simple. Just dinner, dancing a toast or two. Nothing more." She was quiet again. Too quiet. Jackson began to backpedal. "Look, if this is weird or makes you uncomfortable." "I didn't say no," she interrupted, her voice steady. "But I do have conditions." He nodded, attentive. "No touching beyond what's expected. Hand-holding, maybe a polite kiss on the cheek if we're being watched. No late-night emotional confessions. No real dating after this. This is a performance." "Understood." "Crystal clear," Jackson said. "And I want $5,000 paid in full by Friday," she added. "Om fancy bees." "Done." Elise looked almost amused. "You agreed too fast." "I'm desperate," he grinned. That afternoon, he wired the money. By 6 p.m., she texted him a photo of a cocktail dress she was considering for the wedding. A sleek emerald green number that made his phone feel suddenly too hot in his hands. "Too much," she asked. "Too perfect," he replied. The next day they met again, this time at Jackson's Lakeview property outside Boulder. His home sat on a stretch of land bordered by pine trees and wildflowers, far from the buzz of downtown. Inside, the decor was minimalist but tasteful. Elise stepped inside, looking around with quiet curiosity. "Nice place," she said, very restrained. Jackson chuckled. "Says the woman who teaches finger painting to 5-year-olds. Elise smiled and dropped her purse. "Let's get started." They sat across from each other on a large leather sofa. A notepad lay between them, filled with notes, how they met, what they liked to do together, private jokes to use during dinner. Jackson even had printed photos of them from the gala, digitally edited to look like candid moments. "This is disturbingly well prepared," Elise muttered. "Hey, if we're going to lie to my mother, we better do it right," he replied. As they rehearsed the story, something unexpected happened. The laughter wasn't forced. The pauses weren't awkward. They learned that they shared a guilty love of baking, shows a dislike for cilantro, and an oddly similar sense of humor. At one point, Elise looked up from the notepad and asked, "What does your mom want in a daughter-in-law?" Jackson hesitated. "Someone who doesn't take no for an answer, who bakes pies from scratch, who calls every Sunday and joins charity boards." Elise let out a soft laugh. "Well, I can microwave a mean apple turnover. That'll have to do." Their final rehearsal involved mock dancing in his kitchen to a jazz playlist. Jackson placed his hand lightly on Elise's waist. She didn't pull away. She moved effortlessly naturally, with a poise that caught him off guard. "Not bad," he said. I teach preschoolers how to dance in circles, she replied dryly. But neither of them mentioned how real the moment felt. As she packed up to leave, Elise paused in the doorway. One night, Jackson, no reruns, no sequels. Understood. She nodded. See you at the wedding. And then she was gone. But the way her perfume lingered in the hallway told him this arrangement might get complicated. Fast. By Friday afternoon, the plan was in full motion. Jackson Reed had never felt so nervous for a social event in his life. Not for business galas, not for high-profile fundraisers, not even when pitching million-dollar projects to city developers. No, this felt different. This wasn't about closing a deal. This was about faking love in front of his entire family. He paced the length of his lakeside home, adjusting the cuff of his shirt only to realize he wasn't even dressed yet. The living room table was covered in notes, character backstories, relationship timelines, inside jokes, all crafted to make their fake relationship look real. At exactly 2 p.m., a knock echoed from the front door. Jackson opened it to find Elise standing there in jeans, a navy peacoat and a ponytail that made her look effortlessly poised. Ready to rehearse our lie, she asked, stepping inside without hesitation. Let's call it an improvised truth, Jackson offered, closing the door behind her. Elise laughed. Cute. They moved into the living room, where he'd prepared tea and snacks, trying to make it feel less like a business briefing and more like a casual date. But there was no denying the weight of what they were about to pull off. I've written a bio on my family members, Jackson said, handing her a folder. Bowen and Bob and Bart Iswend. Elise opened it and raised an eyebrow. You made dossiers. I don't do anything halfway. The folder included photos of his mother, Caroline Reed, a woman with impeccable taste and a talent for sniffing out lies from across the room. Then came Amelia, his younger sister, full of fire and warmth. Finally, Uncle Doug, who drank too much scotch and asked too many questions. Your mom looks intense, Elise commented. She's kind when she wants to be, but she'll know if something feels off. That's why we need to be airtight. Understood. They ran through everything. The story of their first date, a coffee shop she'd never been to, their first fight over pineapple on pizza, and the private nickname Jackson was supposed to call her, Ellie. Elise raised an eyebrow. You don't like it. It's fine. Just don't overdo it or I'll sound like a golden retriever. Jackson laughed, relaxing just a bit. Noted. But something shifted as the hours passed. They weren't just acting anymore. The stories they crafted began to take on a strange sense of familiarity. Elise would toss in a detail, and Jackson would build on it. They laughed at fake memories that started to feel oddly real. Remember the night we got caught in the rain, walking along 6th Street, she teased, eyes sparkling. Oh yeah, Jackson grinned. You ruined your shoes, and I bought you street tacos to make up for it. You were mad because your hair got frizzy. Jackson touched his perfectly styled waves. That would absolutely happen. They both laughed, but it lingered longer than a scripted joke. Then came the wardrobe check. I brought options, Elise said, pulling 2 garment bags from the back seat of her car. One held a sleek off-the-shoulder navy dress, the other an emerald gown with a plunging neckline and subtle shimmer. She held them up for approval. Jackson swallowed. Green, definitely the green. Elise smirked, didn't even pretend to hesitate. He shrugged. It suits your eyes. She blinked but said nothing, simply hanging the dress on a doorframe. As the sun dipped over the lake, painting the windows, gold Elise walked over to the grand piano in the corner and trailed her fingers across the keys. You play, she asked. Used to, before everything got complicated. Play something. I'm out of practice. Humor me. He sat and hesitated before playing a simple tune, soft, hesitant, and full of memory. Elise stood quietly beside him, listening. You're better than you think, she said gently. Jackson didn't look up. You're full of surprises, Elise Carter. You have no idea, she whispered. That evening, after reviewing final details and sharing a quiet dinner of takeout, Ty Elise stood by the door ready to leave. So tomorrow, she said, we pull this off and part ways. That's the plan. She paused. You sure you're ready? Jackson nodded. Are you? But neither of them answered honestly. As she stepped outside, the wind caught her hair. Jackson watched her walk to her car and realized, for the first time, he wasn't just worried about fooling his family. He was worried about fooling himself. Because every part of tonight had felt effortless, comfortable, real, and that scared him more than showing up to a wedding alone. Saturday evening arrived with an eerie stillness, the kind of hush that settles before something big, something that could change everything. Jackson Reed pulled his black suit jacket over his crisp white shirt, adjusting the tie he'd tied 3 times already. His home was quiet, but his mind wasn't. It was spinning. Tonight was the night he'd face his entire family. And tonight he wouldn't be doing it alone. At exactly 6 p.m., Jackson parked his sleek black Tesla along a quiet block in Old Town, just outside a row of ivy-covered brownstones. He walked up to the unit Elise had texted him earlier. The door opened before he could knock. And there she was. Elise Carter looked nothing like the woman he'd spent hours rehearsing with the day before. Gone were the paint-flecked sweaters and practical jeans. In their place stood a vision in emerald green satin, off the shoulder gently hugging her waist, falling like silk down to her ankles. Her auburn hair was curled to one side, cascading over her shoulder like something out of an old film. Her eyes, framed by soft makeup, shimmered with a quiet confidence. Jackson stood frozen. "Is it too much?" Elise asked, adjusting the earring that caught the hallway light. "No," he said, voice low. "It's perfect." She smiled, slightly self-conscious, but still poised. "You ready to lie to 100 strangers?" Jackson offered his arm. "Only if I get to do it with you." They drove through the city in silence at first. Elise looked out the window, one hand lightly resting in her lap. Jackson glanced at her, and then back at the road, wondering how she could make the inside of a car feel like the most elegant place on earth. As they approached the venue, a restored historic hotel with massive glass doors and glowing chandeliers, Jackson parked, stepped out, and circled to open Elise's door. She accepted his hand as she stepped down. "You're sure I don't have lipstick on my teeth?" she asked as they approached the entrance. "I'm sure," he said, "but even if you did, I doubt anyone would notice anything but you." Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Photographers snapped candid shots. Guests mingled in cocktail dresses and tuxedos. The scent of peonies and champagne hung in the air. "Showtime," Elise murmured. Jackson placed a hand on the small of her back. She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly into his touch. They walked toward the reception hall where the wedding party had gathered. Amelia, radiant in a custom ivory gown, spotted them first. "Jackson!" she squealed, rushing over and throwing her arms around him. "You made it." "Of course I did." And this, he turned to Elise, "is Elise, my girlfriend." Elise offered her hand, perfectly poised. "It's so lovely to meet you, Amelia. You look stunning." Amelia beamed. "You're even prettier than I imagined. Jackson's been keeping you a secret." Elise laughed. "He's good at that." Introductions flew fast. Elise shook hands, complimented dresses, nodded at Jackson's business rival without flinching, and handled Jackson's nosy aunt with delicate grace. She even convinced Uncle Doug that yes, Jackson was capable of love. Then came the moment Jackson dreaded his mother. Caroline Reed swept toward them in a navy gown, her silver hair twisted into a perfect chignon. Her smile was regal and reserved, until she got a look at Elise. "You must be the famous Elise," she said. "Elise Carter, it's a pleasure, Mrs. Reed. Please call me Caroline. And you," she turned to Jackson, "have been holding out on us." Jackson felt sweat prick his collar, but Elise saved him. "We met at the Anderson Gala. He impressed me with his knowledge of modern sculpture." Caroline blinked. "Jackson? Shocking, right?" Elise said, slipping her hand into Jackson's naturally. Caroline laughed. "Well, I can already tell this night is going to be interesting." As cocktail hour passed, Jackson kept catching himself watching Elise. Not because he had to, but because he couldn't help it. The way she sipped her drink gracefully, nodded at compliments, or laughed quietly at inside jokes they hadn't rehearsed. She didn't just fit in. She belonged. Then the band started to play. Soft jazz spilled through the room, and couples took to the dance floor beneath a cascade of string lights and gold chandeliers. Jackson turned to Elise. "May I?" She didn't hesitate. "I thought you'd never ask." He led her onto the floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. The silk of her dress under his palm, the scent of her perfume. Soft, floral, faintly citrus. Made his breath hitch. "You really are good at this," he said. "So are you." They moved in sync. There was no need to fake rhythm or chemistry. It was there, undeniable. For a moment, time bent. The music blurred. His sister's wedding, the noise, the plan, it all fell away. All that existed was the woman in his arms and the way her eyes looked up into his soft and searching. "You're staring," Elise whispered. "Can't help it." A beat passed. "Jackson," she murmured, "this is starting to feel a little too real." "I know," he replied quietly. "I feel it too." They didn't kiss. Not yet. But they didn't let go when the song ended either. Instead, they stayed close. Close enough that Jackson could hear her heart feel her breath. For a man who'd built his life on walls, the cracks were forming. And for Elise Carter, a woman who lived in color and canvas, it was the first time someone had looked at her like she was the masterpiece. The wedding wound down in a haze of music, laughter, and flickering candlelight. Guests began trickling out of the reception hall with hugs and tipsy goodbyes. Jackson's tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. Elise stood by the dessert table, talking with Amelia's college roommate, her green gown glowing beneath the soft amber lights. Jackson couldn't stop watching her. He kept waiting for the illusion to wear off, for the role-playing to collapse, for her smile to flicker like a stage light that had burned too long. But it didn't. If anything, she seemed more radiant now than when the night began. After helping Amelia into her getaway car with her new husband, Jackson returned to the ballroom to find Elise saying goodbye to his mother. Caroline held Elise's hands in hers. "You're lovely, dear. I do hope we'll be seeing you again soon." Elise smiled. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As they walked out to the car together, Jackson opened the passenger door for her, like it was second nature now. Elise hesitated at the edge of the seat, her eyes lingering on him. "Ready to go back to the real world?" she asked. He gave a tight smile. "I'm not entirely sure what that is anymore." The ride back to Elise's brownstone was quiet, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence filled with unsaid things. The kinds of thoughts that pressed against the inside of your chest, just waiting to be spoken. Finally, at a red light, Jackson cleared his throat. "I just want to say thank you for what," she asked, voice soft. "For tonight, for saving me, for being unbelievable." Elise turned to look at him. It wasn't as painful as I expected. They both smiled, but this time, it wasn't part of a performance. When they pulled up to her place, Jackson walked her to the door. She hesitated at the top step. "So," she said carefully, "this is the part where we say good night." Jackson nodded. "Right. The arrangement's done." A long pause followed. Neither moved. He took a small step forward, lowering his voice. "Elise, what if I don't want it to be done?" Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I haven't stopped thinking about you since the gala," he confessed. "And tonight, everything felt real. I don't care if it started as pretend. I'd like to take you out, for real. No audience, no scripts." Elise stepped back slightly. Her walls came up fast, and her voice turned cautious. "Jackson, we come from completely different worlds." "I know. I paint murals for preschoolers and run art programs out of repurposed warehouses. You build towers downtown and eat lunch with city councilmen. I know that too." She crossed her arms, unsure if she was protecting herself or testing him. "What if tonight only felt good because it was safe, because we knew how it ended?" Jackson looked down, then back up. What if it didn't have to end? The air hung heavy between them. He didn't reach for her. He didn't press. He just stood there, open, waiting, vulnerable for the first time in a very long time. Elise bit her lip. "Dinner," she said finally. His eyes lifted. "Dinner. One night, one real date. No suits, no scripts, no emerald gowns." He smiled. "You got it. But Jackson." He waited. "This doesn't mean I'm falling for you," she said firmly. "I'm not asking you to fall. Just walk next to me for a bit." She smiled at that. "Tuesday, 7 p.m. Pick somewhere that doesn't take reservations." And then she stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. Jackson stood there for a few seconds, listening to the echo of his own heartbeat. Then he turned, walked down the steps, and exhaled into the night air like a man who had just leapt off a cliff, and finally realized he wanted to fall. Tuesday evening arrived with a kind of quiet hope. No tuxedos, no family to impress, no fake backstories. Just two people who had once lied about love, now trying to see if there might be something real behind it. Jackson Reed showed up right on time at Elise's brownstone. Gone was the tailored suit and executive polish. Tonight he wore dark jeans, a navy Henley, and a jacket that still smelled faintly of cedar and cologne. He looked normal, approachable, nervous even. Elise opened the door in a soft blue sweater hair, pulled into a loose braid over one shoulder, and the simplest smile he'd ever seen on her. "You look beautiful," he said. "You look surprisingly human," she teased. They drove to a tiny Italian restaurant tucked into a quiet Denver neighborhood. No valet, no dress code, just red checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. As they stepped inside, the owner recognized Jackson immediately. Mr. Reed. Been a while, back with the same girl. Jackson paused, but Elise saved him. "No," she said with a grin. "This time, it's real." The man winked. "Then you picked the right night." They were seated in a quiet corner under twinkling string lights. The air smelled of garlic rosemary and something warm baking in the back. It was perfect. No pretense, no performances, just them. Over bruschetta and glasses of Chianti, they started peeling back layers. Jackson told her about growing up fast, how their dad died when he was in college and he had to become both big brother and protector overnight. "I started building things," he said. "Buildings, teams, plans. I liked the control, but I think somewhere along the way, I forgot how to live without a blueprint." Elise shared her story in turn, how her parents, both teachers, never really understood her decision to pursue art full-time. "I spent years proving to them and to myself that choosing passion over practicality wasn't a mistake," she said. "The art center is barely surviving some months, but I've never regretted it." "You're a builder too," Jackson said quietly. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You build moments," he explained. "Magic. Connection. I watched you do it at the wedding. Everyone felt seen." Elise didn't respond immediately, but her eyes softened. Later, over shared tiramisu, she leaned in, brushing a napkin across her lip. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why me?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Why didn't you ask someone else to pretend?" Jackson met her gaze. "Because you didn't care who I was. You saw people, not headlines. And because when you walked into that gala 2 months ago, everything else stopped." Elise looked down, then up again. "You're really bad at casual dating, you know?" "I've never done it," he said honestly. She laughed. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, favorite childhood books, songs that made them cry, the worst meals they ever cooked. Jackson revealed a deep love for classic rock ballads. Elise confessed she had a habit of doodling when she was nervous, tiny hearts in the corners of her notepad. And sometime around 10:30, she reached across the table and took his hand. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't for show. It was just real. When Jackson walked her to her door, they stood outside in the cool night breeze. "I had a really good time," Elise said. "So did I." She hesitated. "So, what now?" "We take it slow," he said. "We figure it out." Elise nodded. No contracts, no arrangements, no pretending, he added. She smiled, and this time it wasn't polished or poised. It was vulnerable, pure. She leaned up and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Jackson." He stood there for a long time after she closed the door, smiling like a man who had just been handed the blueprint for something he never thought he'd build, a future worth falling into. 2 months into dating, Jackson and Elise had developed a rhythm, equal parts familiar and exhilarating. Saturday mornings were for hiking in the foothills, Elise showing up in oversized sunglasses and bringing trail mix she always forgot she didn't like. Wednesday nights meant Jackson sneaking away from board meetings to catch her community art classes, where he'd sit in the back, pretending not to be noticed, and failing. They weren't perfect. Elise still flinched at lavish gifts. Jackson sometimes forgot how to talk about things that weren't strategic, but they were trying. They were learning. They were building something, slowly, honestly, and then everything nearly fell apart. It was a rainy Thursday evening when Jackson showed up at Elise's apartment for dinner, carrying her favorite Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. He knocked once, then again. No answer. Worried, he opened the door. It wasn't locked. Inside, Elise sat cross-legged on the floor of her tiny living room, surrounded by open folders, overdue invoices, and a laptop blinking with spreadsheets. Her eyes were red. A mug of untouched tea sat on the coffee table. "Elise," he said softly. She didn't look up right away. Then, with a shaking breath, she said, "We're going to lose the art center." Jackson sat beside her without asking. "Talk to me." She handed him a sheet of paper, a withdrawal notice. "Our biggest donor just pulled funding," she whispered. said they're moving their focus to STEM programs. We have 3 weeks left on rent. I've got artists counting on me, kids, seniors. If I can't raise nearly $60,000 by the end of the month, it's over. Jackson exhaled. Let me write a check. She pulled away from him. Fast. No. Elise. No, she said again, firmer this time. That's not how this works. I want to help. I know. But if you bail me out, I'll never know if this center survived because I earned it or because I dated the right man. Jackson paused. He looked at her. Really looked. The woman who had danced with him beneath chandeliers now sat crumpled on the floor, surrounded by the broken edges of her dream. Okay, he said at last. Then let me help a different way. She looked at him cautiously. I won't write a check, he continued, but I'll help you strategize. Tap into my network. Let's build a plan. Together? Elise didn't answer right away, but when she finally did, it came with a slow, grateful nod. Over the next 2 weeks, Jackson and Elise turned crisis into action. He introduced her to several of his contacts, tech entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and local business owners who'd once ignored community outreach but now saw value in art and education. She built the pitch deck. He helped her rehearse it. They organized a fundraiser, an immersive gallery event titled Color Outside the Lines, featuring art from local student seniors and underrepresented creators. Elise brought the soul, Jackson brought the spotlight. The night of the event, the community center transformed into a glowing haven of creativity, walls lined with bold murals and handmade sculptures, children giving impromptu tours of their favorite pieces, a string quartet playing softly under fairy lights. Jackson watched Elise work the room, not as a hostess, but as a visionary. Her voice was calm, her energy magnetic. People listened. They believed. By evening's end, they had surpassed their goal, raising over $85,000. The art center was saved, and not because of Jackson's money. Because of Elise's fire, later that night, they stood on the roof of the center overlooking the lights of the city wind tugging at Elise's hair. You did it, Jackson said. We did it, she corrected. He took her hand. I've closed billion-dollar deals, he murmured, but none of them ever felt like this. Elise smiled, but her eyes brimmed. It wasn't the money that saved this place, she said. It was knowing I wasn't alone. Jackson pulled her into his arms. Whatever comes next, he whispered, I'm in. Not to rescue you, just to walk beside you. And in that quiet moment above the city and beneath a sky of stars, they both realized something simple and true. Love isn't just about showing up when it's easy. It's about staying when everything's on the line. 6 months after the night they saved the art center, the sky over Colorado turned clear and golden. Fall was stretching into its final breath, leaves scattered like confetti across the trails that wrapped through evergreen forest just outside Denver. Jackson Reed had suggested the hike casually. Something light, nothing too steep, he'd said. But Elise had seen that look in his eyes, the one that meant something was up. He was too calm, too quiet. Still, she followed him. They walked in silence, boots crunching over crisp leaves. The trail eventually opened into a small clearing that overlooked the valley below the Rockies, rising in the distance like ancient guardians. And there in the middle of that open space was a blanket spread across the grass, a small thermos, 2 ceramic mugs, a box of chocolate croissants from her favorite bakery in Lodo. Elise turned to him, hands on her hips. You're either about to confess something horrible or something very, very good. Jackson smiled. Let's go with the latter. They sat, they sipped cider, talked about nothing and everything. And then just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting golden light through the pines, Jackson stood. Elise Carter, he began suddenly breathless 6 months ago. I asked you to pretend to be my girlfriend. One night, one dinner, one lie to keep my family off my back. She blinked, her chest already tightening. I thought it would be a transaction, he continued, but what I got was the truth. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small navy box. You taught me how to show up, not as the man with the money, not the fixer, just me. You showed me what it means to build something worth keeping, not towers, not portfolios, a life with you. He opened the box. Inside sat a simple ring, an oval diamond set on a thin band of rose gold, understated, elegant, perfect. Elise, he said, voice cracking, Will you marry me? For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elise let out a small, stunned laugh, tears spilling down her cheeks. You idiot. Is that a yes? She nodded, laughing harder now, and stepped forward. Yes, Jackson Reed. It's a yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. Then she kissed him, slow sure with every ounce of joy and relief that had been building between them for months. Exactly 1 year after Amelia's wedding, Elise and Jackson returned to the very same hotel ballroom where their story had begun as a carefully staged performance. This time, there were no scripts. Elise walked down the aisle in a soft cream dress that shimmered like starlight, her eyes never leaving Jackson's. Amelia stood proudly at her side as maid of honor. Caroline cried the entire ceremony. Even Uncle Doug stayed sober until dinner, and as they shared their first dance. This time as husband and wife, Jackson whispered in her ear, Do you ever think about how none of this was supposed to happen? Elise leaned her head against his chest. I think some stories are meant to begin where others would end. They danced beneath the same lights, surrounded by the same people in the same place. But this time everything was different, because this time it was real. Some love stories begin with sparks. Others begin with fate. But this one began with a lie. A simple plan to survive a family wedding turned into something no one, least of all Jackson and Elise, could have predicted. What started as a carefully orchestrated performance slowly unraveled into honesty, into vulnerability, into the kind of connection that doesn't come from fairy tales, but from the courage to show up, drop the act, and be seen. Because love doesn't always arrive on cue. Sometimes it sneaks in through the side door, disguised as a favor, a deal, a pretend smile in a crowded ballroom. But when it's real, you feel it in the way a hand lingers, in the sound of a laugh that wasn't rehearsed, in the way someone chooses to stay, even when there's no script telling them to. Jackson didn't need a fake girlfriend. He needed someone who challenged him, someone who saw past the headlines and into his quietest fears. And Elise, she didn't need saving. She needed a partner, one who wouldn't just fund her dreams, but fight beside her to protect them. In the end, their love wasn't about the arrangement, the appearances, or the perfect timing. It was about choice. Day after day, moment after moment, choosing each other. So, if you're out there wondering whether the messy, unscripted, imperfect kind of love is worth the risk, let this be your answer. Sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead to the most unforgettable endings. And sometimes, a pretend I love you at a wedding becomes the truest thing you'll ever say.